All right, well, this is, as Pastor Jim said, we are in this series called The Story of God. And there are a few different things that we hope to happen during the course of this series. The first is just to give you an overview of the Bible. So from now until Easter, we'll be working our way through the Old Testament. Then when we get to Easter Sunday, we'll pivot to the New Testament. That's one of the reasons why it's a great Sunday to invite people, because we'll be beginning that story together on Easter and then working forward from there. But we also want to give you some tools to help you read and understand the Bible. So if you've got your message notes in there, that you see at the bottom, there's some books and some videos that you can check out that might be helpful. There's also a reading plan there. So some of you, you grew up with these stories, and you know these stories inside and out, and you're like that person who's read the book, but everyone else has just seen the movie. And you're like, well, you know what they cut out. They cut out this scene, right? And what happened to that part of their dog? It's like, you're that person, right? Not everyone in the room is that person. And so the reading plan can help you not become that person, but at least know the parts that we're not able to include, right? By using the reading plan, the stories get to move from just being spoken to get inside you. That's how these stories get inside you, through repetition. But again, it also helps you, bring out these puzzle pieces that we just don't have time for, because sometimes we're covering really wide swaths of the story like we are going to this morning. But then the last thing we hope this series does is we genuinely hope it brings you hope. We hope it gives you handrails, so that when things go sideways, there's something to hold on to. There have been times in my life when it felt like things were just trucking along really good with me and God, and then something happens. Either I do something stupid, or something happens around me, and you just get shaken a little bit. And in that moment, you feel lost. And these stories can be that handrail to remind you, I am not lost, and God knows exactly where I am. And so that's true for you this morning. These stories speak to our situations. All right, well, let's pray, and then we'll set the stage and jump into this morning's story. Father, I pray for everyone who is in this sanctuary and watching online this morning. Pray that you'd help us to find ourselves in you this morning. And that as we hear this story unfold, that would help us to understand how we should see ourselves and how you see us. In your name we pray. Amen. Curse and chaos. That's where we left off. Adam and Eve disobey God, and all of creation, mankind included, falls. It's all lost. We're all lost. But not lost in that sense of lost and trying to find our way back home. Oh no, we're lost because we think we know what's best. We're lost in our sin. We're lost in our disobedience. We're lost in our arrogance. We're lost in our pride. And we're lost in our rebellion against a God who loves us. We don't need him. We can do it ourselves. We can figure this out. So that leads all the way to this building of this tower so that we can make a name for ourselves. We can reach to the heavens. We can reach to God, and it can be all about me. We'd have it all under control. God pretty quickly reminds us that he's the one in control, and he scatters mankind. Cursed, 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 cursed. That's the story so far. And it plays out that way. In the first part of the story, there are 5 different times when the curse is either restated or reminded. We, mankind, all of us, are cursed. Cursed. Over and over and over again. But that's not where God was going to let the story end. God wouldn't abandon his creation. God wouldn't abandon us. For God to create something is for him to love it. And he loved creation. And he loved Adam and Eve. And all those people who were building that tower to make a name for themselves, he loved them. So despite their rebellion, despite their arrogance, despite their pride and sin, he had to make a way. He had to begin to build the bridge for them to come back. But he's going to do it in this really, really surprising and unconventional way. He's going to do it with a family. Not with a great leader, not with a governmental program, none of that. With a family. So enter this old man named Abram. And God comes to Abram and he speaks to him. Now, everything that God says to Abram is like chock full of all this incredible meaning and depth. It's not just what Abram says, but it's the way God says it. So the first thing he tells Abram to do is he tells Abram to go west. So if you were here last week, I'll remind you that we talked about how every step that mankind took in the curse was east. Adam and Eve left the garden heading east. Cain, after he kills Abel, heads east. Each step east was a representation of a step away from the Father. So God says to Abram, I want you to go west. There's this very distinct moment where God's saying, with this man and this family, we're bringing it back. And so God makes a promise to Abram. But again, it's not just the substance of the promise that matters, it's the way God says it. These aren't coincidences. God says all throughout this promise, all throughout these directions to Abram, he says, blessed, 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 blessed. 5 times. That's not a coincidence. God is intentionally saying, with this man, we are going to reverse the curse. Everything that has been happening for all this time in this first part of the story, this man and this family are going to be the means to bring it back, the means to reverse the curse. What's even more, it's great, right? So when they're building the Tower of Babel, they say, we want to make a name for ourselves. We want to make ourselves great. And you know what God tells Abram? I'm going to make a name for you. They aren't going to do it themselves. It wasn't like Nimrod and all his buddies at the Tower of Babel who were going to make themselves puffed up and great. They're going to make a name for themselves. God says, I'm going to make a name for you, Abram. And so he quite literally does that later on. A little bit later on in the story, he changes Abram's name to Abraham, which means the father of many. Because that's actually the substance of this promise. The promise is to Abraham and his wife Sarah that despite being old and not having any children, they would have descendants as numerous as the stars. They'd have descendants as numerous as the stars. God would give them a land of their own. More on that in subsequent weeks. And through this family, the nations of the world would once again come under God's blessing. God was going to do this. God was going to do this through Abraham. So that all sounds really good, and there's something that wells up inside. It's like, yes, finally. It's like the moment when you think, yeah, the hero's going to win the story. God's going to set everything right. It's all going to come back together. There's just one problem with using a family to do this. Families are made of people, and people are difficult. Despite the fact that God was going to work the reverse of the curse through Abraham and his family, they were still broken people who were affected by that original act of sin and that original act of rebellion that went all the way to Adam and Eve. their actions and decisions permeated with that, permeated with the curse. And so throughout this whole journey of what God is going to do and work through Abraham, the man who God was going to make a name for, he has all these failings. On two different occasions, Abraham gets nervous about these powerful men who find his wife attractive, and so he lies about being married to her. Says, well, she's not my wife, she's just my sister, practically giving her to them. That created some family drama, as you might suspect. There were issues that arose from those moments. God was going to make a great name for Abraham. But here he is, basically trying to give his wife away just to save his own hide. Well, it's not long before Abraham and Sarah get impatient. God, where are the descendants as numerous as the stars? We don't have any, and we're getting older. So Abraham and Sarah, they come up with a little plan. Like, well, maybe Abraham and Sarah can't have a child, but maybe Abraham and the servant girl can have a child. So Abraham sleeps with a woman named Hagar. And Abraham and Hagar have a child. Do you think that solves the problem? No. God was going to do this through Abraham and Sarah. All they had to do was be obedient. And yet, they take matters in their own hands. They try to do it. They try to figure it out. And it doesn't solve any problems. It just creates more and more and more problems. This isn't what God promised. The promise was God was going to do it. God was going to do the heavy lifting. And Abraham and Sarah weren't holding up their end of the bargain. So this kind of sounds like a deal breaker, doesn't it? Like maybe God's going to go, you know, Abraham, this just ain't working out. There's this other guy across town. I'm going to go talk to him instead. We're just going to start over. Go about your way. Live your life. I'm going to move on. Seems like what I might do if I was in God's position. Seems like the logical thing. I mean, this is going to be the way God's going to reverse the curse, and he can't help but just do what he wants and get in his own way. So it's time for God and Abraham to have a little chat. And it's in the midst of all of this brokenness, all of this sin, all of this one step forward, two steps back, one step west, two steps east, all of this back and forth, that God says to Abraham, I have not given up on you, and I won't give up on you. You will have descendants as numerous as the stars. I will make a name for you. And there's this great scene with all this figurative language that we can't really get into, but God is saying, I will keep this promise to you, Abraham. If I don't, may I be ripped to shreds. God's saying this to Abraham. So finally, at 100 years old, God brings Abraham and Sarah a son named Isaac. That would be the only child Abraham and Sarah have before they die. But God's covenant has just started moving forward. So Isaac, when Isaac is born and grows up, he marries Rebekah. And so here's the next generation. And so God comes to Isaac and he restates the promise. You are the son of Abraham, and your descendants will be as numerous as the stars, and it's through your family that I will bless all the earth. So it was with your father Abraham, so it will be with you. Ironically, Isaac makes some of the same mistakes as his father. Lies about Rebekah being his wife, and so on and so forth. The drama continues, but despite all of it, God remains faithful. Despite Isaac's mistakes that were like his father's, God holds the promise. So Isaac and Rebekah have two sons. Their names were Esau and Jacob. So Esau and Jacob, they couldn't be any more different than each other. Esau's name actually means rough, and he was a man of the field. He was a hunter. Jacob, he was more the kind of guy who wanted to stay inside. He wanted to stay with his mom, and his name actually means deceiver. So as the older brother, Esau would be the one that would carry his family's legacy. He'd be the one. I'm sure the whole time when little Esau and Jacob were growing up, Esau heard Isaac talk about the promise that was made to his grandfather and the promise that was made to Isaac. And now here's Esau, and he's the oldest, so he will be the bearer of this promise. And there's probably a little bit of excitement in him. Again, he's kind of a leader type of guy. Jacob doesn't really like the fact that he's going to play number two. And so he lives up to his name. First, he tricks Esau out of his inheritance. And then he tricks their father Isaac, who is now old and blind, into giving the family blessing to him rather than Esau. Like for Isaac to do it. Well, Esau wasn't really excited about this development, and so Jacob's got to split, and he's got to leave town. But every step Jacob took on that path was cursed, cursed, cursed. Like he makes all these deals in an attempt to continue to trick people and swindle to get what he wants, and he ends up marrying two different women for wives, and he ends up having two concubines, but he only really even loves one of the wives, and that's all he really wanted. Like this family unit, this family who is going to be the means for blessing all the nations, is really, really messed up. Really messed up. They're a factory, not of blessing or love or peace. They're a factory of jealousy and pain and sin and brokenness. So it all catches up to Jacob with this man named Laban. He enters into a deal with Laban, and that's part of his attempts to get the woman he wants as his wife. But Laban turns the tables on Jacob and tricks him into spending years and years and years and years of his life working for Laban and continuing to hold little carrots out in front of him to string him along. After all of that, after all those years of just being tricked himself, Jacob has come to recognize, I'm a broken man. There's a little bit of humility that comes up in him. The facade of that always smirking, wheeling and dealing guy has fallen to the wayside. And he knows there's nowhere for him to go but home. He's got to go home and face the music. So one night on the journey home, God shows up and visits Jacob. The swindling, cheating Jacob. And we get this really interesting story where God and Jacob wrestle each other. I don't know what that looked like. But it seems like in that moment, the arrogance and the cheating is all gone from Jacob. You might think if you enter a wrestling match with God, who's going to win? God touches Jacob's hip and hurts him. But Jacob knows in that moment. Like Jacob was always the guy with a plan, right? He's always the guy with a plan to get what he wanted. But at that moment, he knows he's got nothing. Nothing without God. There is no more plan. There is no more way out. There is no more way through. None of his scheming matters anymore. None of the deals matter anymore. None of the plans matter anymore. The only way through is with God. So he begs God, would you bless me? And it's in that moment God sees who Jacob has now become. And so the blessing and the promise of Abraham and of Isaac moves on to the swindling and cheating Jacob. But an affirmation that Jacob is different than he was, much like he did with his grandfather Abraham. God changes Jacob's name. Because he's not Jacob the deceiver anymore. He's the one who wrestled with God. So he changes Jacob's name to Israel. God continues to remain faithful the whole way through. So Jacob eventually ends up having 13 children, 12 of which are boys, and each of these boys will be the beginning of what we know as the 12 tribes of Israel. And despite everything that's happened, despite all of this brokenness and sin, and no matter how many times everything looked like it was lost, God continued to be faithful and continued to move the promise forward. And now here we are with Jacob with 13 kids, 12 boys, and it appears the promise is back on track. And finally, we are going to see the descendants as numerous as the stars, and everything is going to work out. But this is still a broken family. A broken family made of broken people. So Jacob favors one of his sons more than the other ones. A son named Joseph. The other brothers see this, and they don't like it. Dad seems to love Joseph more than the rest of us. What's that all about? On top of that, Joseph starts to have these dreams, and they're sort of figurative dreams, but the bottom line is the dreams result in Joseph sees his brothers bowing down to him. And Joseph thinks it's a great idea to tell his brothers about these dreams. So like, yeah, we got to do something about Joseph. Got to do something about him. So they decide, oh yeah, let's just kill him. Let's kill him, and we'll tell Dad that some wild animals got him. And then we won't have to worry about all this craziness with the favored son and his dreams and all that rigmarole. Well, thankfully, cooler heads prevail, and they don't kill him. They just sell him into slavery. So he ends up down in Egypt. Joseph is a slave in Egypt. But God is still faithful. So Joseph ends up becoming the chief servant of his master's household, responsible for the comings and goings of the estate. And that's going really well until there's a fallout with the master's wife, which is a really fascinating story. And it results with Joseph wrongfully being tossed in jail. Joseph is wrongfully a prisoner. But God is still faithful. Joseph rises up in the ranks of the prison, and the guards end up seeing him as a great asset to them. And he's not just some prisoner, like he's like an underling guard. Like they let him direct the other prisoners, and they let him be in charge of things in the prison. Well, eventually, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, he begins to have dreams that he doesn't understand. And this word eventually leaks down all the way to Joseph in prison. God is still faithful. And so Joseph says, well, I have a certain level of experience with dreams. I'm pretty good at figuring out what they mean. And God is faithful. And that word moves back up to Pharaoh, all the way to the point where Joseph is brought before Pharaoh, and Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams and warns him of a famine coming that no one knew was going to happen, and Egypt is able to prepare for it. And Joseph is the one that saw that all come to pass. And so Pharaoh makes Joseph like the number two guy in all of Egypt. Joseph, who was sold into slavery. Joseph, who was wrongfully imprisoned. Joseph, the son of Jacob, the son of Isaac, the son of Abraham, is now the number two guy in Egypt. Well, the famine would be widespread, and ultimately, Jacob and the rest of the family would have to come to Egypt for refuge, to come to Egypt to just get food, because everyone in the area obviously knows that Egypt still has food, and so they come down there, and through a whole series of events, they end up coming before Joseph, and Joseph restores relationship with his father and his brothers, and they end up staying in Egypt. And it's there, in Egypt, that Abraham's family flourishes and his descendants become as numerous as the sands. And that's where the story ends for this week. But does this story speak to you and where you're at? Do you ever feel cursed? Do you ever feel like no matter what you do, it's wrong decision after wrong decision, even when you try to make right decisions, there's still bad consequences? I felt that way. The story today is about God. The songs we sang today are about God. And he's referred to in a lot of different ways. We have a lot of names we refer to as God to give him honor and glory and recognize him as the world's one true king. Do you know what God is very often referred to in the Old Testament? The God of Abraham. God of the man who lied about his wife and slept with a servant girl. The God of Isaac, followed in his father's footsteps. The God of Jacob, who tried to swindle and cheat everyone he knew. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God of Matt. The God of you. And the God of you. And the God of you. He hasn't abandoned you. And he won't abandon you. So maybe that's what you need to hear this morning. Maybe that's the handrail that this story provides for you. You have felt cursed and abandoned, and I'm telling you this morning, you are not. You are not cursed and abandoned. Maybe you know someone. Maybe you know someone who's probably feeling that way right now. They're feeling cursed. They're feeling abandoned. Maybe they walked with God at one point, or maybe they didn't. But can you be the ones who remind them that God has not abandoned them? Can you be the ones who tell them God hasn't abandoned you and he won't? This promise that God made to Abraham is called the covenant. And God said, if I do not keep my promise, may I be ripped apart. Well, we know that ultimately, God the Son was ripped apart. But it wasn't because he didn't keep the promise. Him being ripped apart, this was the new covenant. It wasn't ripped apart because he was unfaithful, because he was disobedient. He was ripped apart because I was unfaithful, and I was disobedient. That's the story of this bread and this juice. Regardless of how I stumble or how I fall, he died for me, and he invites me back. And so you, this morning, are invited to come to these tables, to this bread and this juice. And for some of you, every step you take towards this table will be a step you take traveling west, back towards him. And it might take guts. It might be scary. You might be like, I don't know how God's going to treat me. I don't know what God's going to think of me. But I'm telling you, it's time to come west. It's time to come to the table.